exclusive.
Hello, my name is Emmanuel Munsanje. I'm here again to lecture in costing on chapter 2. The other time I looked at chapter 1 where cost accounting was defined. So let's see what is there on chapter 2. Chapter 2 talks about cost classification. When you look at classification, it means putting the cost in groups. There are many ways in which you can classify or you can put costs in groups. You can classify them either by element, bullet 1, either as direct or indirect cost, either functional cost, fixed and variable cost, or other categories. Let's see what it means. If you are classifying the cost by element, it means you want to narrate where your expenditure went to. You can classify it as material costs. It means you spent on materials. You can classify it as labor cost. It means you spent on labor. Or you can classify it as expenses. It means you spent on expense. That is classification by element. You can also classify the cost as either direct or indirect cost. The difference is that when you classify the cost as direct, it means you can link that cost to the product. And if you classify it as indirect, you cannot link. Let me give an example. If you are making bread, the direct cost could be the cost of sugar, because when you eat, you can taste the sugar inside the bread, which is the product, meaning you can link what you spent to the product. But when you look at indirect costs, peradventure maybe in the facility that you were making bread, it was a rented facility. You cannot trace rentals in the bread, and therefore the cost of rent is indirect. So the gist of the matter is that if you can link the cost, it's direct. If you can't link the cost to the product, it is indirect. Now look at this one. Total expenditure may be analyzed as follows. There are materials which may be direct or indirect. There is labor component which may be direct or indirect. There may be expenses which may be direct or indirect. The concept is the same. When you say direct, it means you can link the expenditure to the product. When you say indirect, you cannot link. When you add all total direct costs, they are called prime costs. When you add all indirect costs, they are called total indirect cost. But when you add prime cost and indirect cost, you get what is called total cost. There you are. Direct materials. The direct materials are part of the product. Example of direct materials, like I said, you're making bread. The raw material that goes into bread, it is an example of the direct cost, which is flour. And then the boat parts and assembles, e.g. tires and cars and so on and so forth. So the issue of direct is linkage. Direct wage, those people who are actually laboring and making the product, what they are paid is called direct wage. Direct expenses are linked to specific product where you spend, and peradventure indirect costs are those that are not linked. Functional cost, you can also classify the costs as functional, meaning you spend as per function. For example, production cost. If you say this is production cost because the function on which you spent was on production. Administration costs, if you classify them as such, it means that what you spent worked at the administration. Selling costs, as you are selling your product, what you spend could be categorized as selling cost. That's a function. Distribution cost, when you have a product, you need to distribute to various centers for sale, and any expenses in the distribution process is called distribution cost. Then financing cost, this is also, the function is financing. For example, you got a loan and then you are servicing it. The rentals could be categorized as financing cost. Fixed and variable cost. The costs that are fixed do not increase or decrease as you escalate what you are doing. For example, rentals are an example of a fixed cost. If you are making 2 loaves of bread under one facility that is rented and you are paying 500 kwacha, as you increase the level of activities or the number of loaves of bread, that will still remain same. That's why it's called fixed cost. The variable cost, vary means changing. The variable costs are those that are changing as you increase what you're doing. For example, if you're making bread again, you make 1 loaf of bread, you incur a certain amount of cost. The more loaves that you incur, certain costs will also increase proportionally. For example, the cost of flour will increase as you increase the number of loaves of bread that you are making. Other costs, there is classification that may be called other. There are those that are avoidable costs. Those are costs which you wouldn't incur if you didn't engage in that activity. Unavoidable costs are those that you can incur, you cannot run away from. Controllable cost. Managers have the ability to control the costs, preferably lowering the costs. So the costs that managers have ability to control are called controllable costs. And uncontrollable costs are those whereby they can't do anything about it. They have to be incurred. Then other costs are called discretionary costs. This means you use your discretion or initiative, e.g. advertising. If you want, you can't advertise. Research and development. If you want, you can't research and develop. So such costs, it is the discretion of the manager to incur them. So that is the classification of costs which we looked at. There are some costs which are put in groups and they can be classified as such, and this is precisely what we looked at in this segment. Thank you very much.